Hello, everyone. I am your host, Deacon Adam.
I'm your co-host, Father Matthew.
And we are excited to bring you a special edition of Stories That Work. This was your idea.
Yeah, we're calling it Stories That Don't Work.
Yes. So this is gonna be excellent. But before we get to a point where we're probably laughing too hard to speak and say normal words, why don't you open with a prayer?
All right, that sounds good. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. O heavenly King, O Comforter, the Spirit of truth, who art in all places and fillest all things, the treasury of good things and giver of life, come and abide in us, cleanse us from every stain, and save our souls, O good one. Amen.
Amen. So I'll give you a couple of updates before we bring on today's guest, Father Joseph Huneycutt. First thing is we have continued enrollment for the St. Athanasius Academy. There are school systems just now going back to school this week, and parents are trying to figure out what that looks like. And fortunately, the St. Athanasius Academy already had some experience in doing online education. So if things aren't working out and you're looking for a different path, I recommend checking that out. We'll put a link under the show notes. Also, Father Matthew, thank you for taking over the show last 2 weeks as I was busy with all sorts of things. One of them was the launch of the semester of St. Athanasius Academy. And you also mentioned, which I'm very thankful for, a confusing title of a documentary that the Department of Missions Evangelism has released, In the Name of Choice. And it takes a look at, it's a 9-part docuseries taking a look at women who feel trapped or forced into abortion and those who are helping. We have several Orthodox organizations featured. It's not a pro-choice documentary, and it's not a pro-life documentary. What it does, I would argue, is it looks at abortion as a symptom of a bigger problem in these women feeling like they have no choice and they're alone, and how that changes when we come alongside them and tell them we're there for them, and they take back the ownership of their choice. This is something that's inherent in our theology as Orthodox Christians. We call it free will, but we have this choice, and so helping these women in that. So that's available for free on YouTube. Collectively, I think it's about 90 minutes if you skip some of the credits. So Father Matthew, I appreciate you mentioning that. Appreciate the work you did the last 2 weeks with our guests. Those are very interesting stories that I was able to hone in on. Do you have anything to share before we bring on our guest?
Well, just a comment on that. The pro-life, you said it's not a pro-life documentary. That doesn't mean it's against the pro-life movement. It's I was really impressed at how you bring to light the complexities of the issue, because oftentimes the pro-life issue is seen as very overly simplistic. Mm-hmm. But for the women involved, it's not simplistic. So I want to say that for people who are watching that documentary, they need to watch beyond episode 1.
Right.
Episode 1 is thought-provoking and challenging and lays a lot of groundwork, but they have to really keep going. So maybe at some point in the near future, we'll actually do one of these shows on your docu-series.
Oh, that would be interesting.
And then also my other thought is I want to thank my dad, Father Stephen Howell, for being my guest co-host. It's always nice to have a wingman alongside of you. And last 2 weeks ago with Peter and Sharon Georges talking about the Uganda Children's Fund, my computer froze and they were able to keep the show going without me for about a minute. So I want to thank my dad for joining in. So that's it. I don't have any other updates right now.
Those are great stories. I'll tell you, it's interesting if somebody's not sure what to think. We've had Father Turbo Qualls on a few times. People have heard his practical presence and how good he is at the way he speaks. And he's in one of the episodes and speaking to the complexities of what we're dealing with and how shame traps these women. And that's such an important part of the message. So thank you for doing all that. I think it's time for our guests.
Let's bring him out.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm trying to figure out how to make you big. I can't. It won't let me do it. I wanted you to be the biggest part of the screen.
So I'm trying to figure out how to be smaller.
So in Stories That Don't Work, we might have some random technical difficulties, both intentional and unintentional, throughout the show.
So, Father Joseph, you know, from my perspective, I'd be shocked if somebody didn't know who you were, because I think you had one of the most popular podcasts on Ancient Faith Radio, Orthodoxy, and which I thoroughly enjoyed that, with your blog, with all of your books. But just in case, do you mind giving a short autobiography?
Father Joseph Huneycutt. I'm from North Carolina. My parents were Southern Baptist, so I was raised Southern Baptist. Eventually I became an Episcopalian. My wife and I were married in the Episcopal Church. I was an Episcopal priest after seminary at Nashotah House briefly before converting to Orthodoxy at St. Ignatius in Franklin, Tennessee in 1993. I was ordained a priest in the Orthodox Church in 1994. Served in North Carolina for a dozen years before moving to Houston, Texas. Was second priest at St. George, Houston for 5 years, and for now 10 years. Next month, I will have been at St. Joseph in Houston as well. That's it.
And most importantly, the first Christian ed director of Camp St. Thecla. I would say this. Oh, you're frozen.
Yep.
And we're going to have, see, we didn't even, no, this one's not planned.
We just have to roll with it.
That's a story that doesn't work. So
that was actually an amazingly concise and perfect autobiography.
So my relationship with Father Joseph Huneycutt began when he was the Christian. I reached out to him to be the Christian ed director for Camp St. Thecla, and this was in 2004. And we also had Joel Finley, who is the nephew of the chairman of the department, Father John Finley, and Paul Finley, many of you know of, or Uncle Paul, as he was at the village. And so Joel Finley was our evening program director. And somehow Father Huneycutt got a picture that's still on the internet of me and my brother wearing mullet wigs dancing at evening program.
How would we find that picture if we looked it up in Google?
It's not hard to find, sadly. It's not hard to find.
Adam Roberts mullet?
It's a good wig, too. So Father Huneycutt went back and said, so I've had a long relationship with him. There he is. I guess we have to stop talking about him.
You guys told me you were going to intentionally botch the show, so it made it look like having me on is one of the things that don't work in missions and evangelism. That's wrong.
That is wrong. I'm going to blame your internet connection.
Well, my church secretary does these days, thanks to COVID, have to school her kids along with working at the church. So that's probably it.
Yeah.
So why don't I dive right in, not knowing how long I'm going to be diving. When you guys asked me to be on the show, you suggested, some ideas that don't work. For example, reserve seating in a church that has no room for visitors. When I came to St. Joseph, they had one parking spot labeled visitor parking. One. And I never really thought about it until my wife said, what if two visitors?
Are we going to have repeat problems?
Yeah.
This is not, I promise, this is not us.
When I came, we're done up before.
He's coming back a little bit.
We might have to reboot the show.
I know. There you go.
Oh, there he goes. That was not intentional.
I feel like this is Murphy's Law. We do an episode on stories that don't work, and we end up with things that don't work.
Well, we might have to reschedule and rebroadcast this, because I know Father Joseph has some great stories.
Hey, here's a third time's a charm.
There's no one watching anymore except the two of you, so I don't have to worry about it.
Tell your church secretary to stop schooling her children.
Things that don't work for evangelism, homeschooling your kids at church.
So you said your wife asked, the last thing we heard was your wife asked, what if two visitors show up?
Yeah, so we just got rid of the one visitor parking. But visitors can park wherever they want. Having one parking spot for visitors just seemed to send the wrong message. Now, when I what I did also notice is the deacon, the readers, the assistant priest, the guy who sells candles, they all get to church early and take up all the parking spaces nearest the church. So that's also a bad idea. Perhaps those might be able to park somewhere else so that visitors, newcomers, can have a parking space nearer the church. And one of the
you just hit me where it hurts, Father Joseph, because I live in a really cold place and I park closest to the church. Now I'm going to have to rethink that.
Now, I tell the story, and forgive me, you guys probably know it. True story. When I was in sales, before going to seminary, one of my customers told me the perfect way, this is back in the days of landline phones, the perfect way to get rid of these pesky salesmen that call you. He said, what I do is I ask them, are you a born-again Christian? And if they say yes, I say, well, I'm not, and I hang up, And if they say no, you say, well, I am, and I hang up. So he said, so that's what you should do. So sure enough, like a month later, my wife and I are having dinner. The phone rang. This guy started into his sales pitch. And I said, excuse me, can I ask you a question? Are you a born-again Christian? He said, what? I said, just answer the question. Are you a born-again Christian? He said, what am I supposed to say? I said, tell me the truth. He said, no. And I said, well, I am, and I don't deal with people who are not. And I hung up the phone. 30 seconds later, he called back and said, I am. So that's true story, quickest conversion I'd ever seen to Christianity. So that maybe worked too well. One of the things that I've learned, or at least I have to keep learning, is that you have to repeat education over and over and over in the parish. And sometimes you can have a fairly solid group and you want to move them to the next level. That's probably not the best idea, because the level that you're at is probably where you're always going to be. But I'll give you an example. Once I was doing a class 20 years ago on iconography, and everybody had been to all the classes. I was on like class number 5. And I worked really hard on it that day. Back before PowerPoint, they had poster board, and I made all these different poster boards, and I'm talking about the colors used in iconography, the mandorla that symbolizes, some connection between heaven and earth, the great mystery we can't understand. I went into all of this symbolism, and a guy was new that night, and at the end of the class, an hour and a half, where I did a fantastic job, he raised his hand, he said, what's an icon? And he was serious, because I failed as the teacher to just give them the basics. And so you have to teach over and over and over. In fact, the same fellow, we were having our Pascha service one year, and here's where we fail. I see this all the time. We don't explain, maybe in the bulletins that are handed out, why we're doing what we do. We sort of give the inside notes to the people that know what we're talking about. For instance, I print all these languages in the Pascha bulletin, the Christ is risen and the responses. And so I'm coming around, I'm doing the sensing, I said, Christ is risen. And people said, indeed he is risen. And this guy says, hallelujah. And so I thought, well, okay. And so the next thing I say, Christos Voskresi, Vistino Voskresi. He said, yeehaw! So then I said, Amasia come, Hakan come. And he said something like, I don't know, pass the potatoes. I mean, it was something that was not in the bulletin. So I told the son, huh?
Oh, I can still hear you. But you're frozen. You have a really good facial expression, just so you know. I can tell that your secretary is still teaching.
I'm thinking about potatoes right now.
If we take a picture of this, there will be so many memes.
Stop it.
Okay. Well, I can hear you.
We can hear you though. Keep talking.
If you can, when you can't hear me, I don't know how I'll be able to know. Anyway, so I sent the subdeacon out. I said, would you go tell that guy to please stop just yelling random responses to whatever we say. And he did, and the fellow, he stopped. He was an inquirer. And afterwards, he apologized. He said, I didn't know what y'all were saying. He didn't know what we were saying. We were all doing the different languages. He didn't know what we were saying.
Yeah.
So if my bulletin had been, I don't think we have to go back to square one every time, but perhaps if a visitor comes to the church, they should be able to negotiate our bulletins without having a decoder ring or, knowing some secret language that the Orthodox only have.
I think I'm not going to share my story, but one day we could share stories about first-time visitors to Pascha.
Right.
Yeah, I've got my own nightmare stories of that. Do you remember a long time ago, Father Joseph Huneycutt, you probably remember this, that when we would get slide presentations in school and they would just show you a series of still pictures while someone's talking? Do you remember those? That's what we're experiencing right now. We just get a random image of you smiling as it progresses to the next one.
It's great.
But you can still hear me, right?
I can. If you know what might be a temporary solution is if you turn off your camera and keep your mic on. I know we have an audience out there that's watching. They want to hear your stories. That might improve your bandwidth. So you can keep telling us you're our great Antiochian storyteller. So you gotta keep it going for everybody. So I'll share while you're working on your camera. I'll share my story that didn't work. I convinced some friends of mine to come to Pascha, and we at that time did an ice cream party after Pascha. We really missed ice cream during Lent, and so I said, "Come! It's an exciting service, and we have ice cream afterwards." They said, "Okay," and so they were really blown away by the rush procession, right, in the beginning, and then we finish that and we get inside, and I really obviously had not thought this thing through. We get to the beginning of liturgy and they go, "How much longer is there?" I was like, "Oh, maybe another 2 hours."
And you're already at least an hour and a half in.
Yeah, and they're looking at me I said, "Why don't you sit down and chill out?" So they sat down and they've never come back. I totally blew it. They did have the ice cream. They sat down. Some really, really, really nice person came along and said, "You're in my seat." And so that's been my story that works. I'm I'll consider inviting them to Agape Vespers, and say, "Hey, a year from now, it's going to be really cool if you hang around." But that's about it. So, Father Joseph, it looks like you figured out how to turn your camera off. And your mic.
Your microphone.
I never thought when you guys invited me on, things that don't work, you would be telling me to turn things off. And so
now you're a pulsating icon every time you talk. It's very interesting. Okay, well, let's hear another story.
Well, you might want to do inventory about what materials are present in a mission, particularly as a priest if you're visiting. I'll give you a true story, and I hope if any of these people are listening, they can laugh along with me. But when I first started with the Missions and Evangelism Department, I was sent to a mission to do their second or third liturgy. And Father Michael Kaiser, God rest his soul, had done, I think, one liturgy for them previously. So I wrote the contact person and I said, "Do you have everything for the liturgy?" And I sent him the list of everything that you need. And he wrote back, yes, we have everything. So there was no Vespers that night. My plane landed late. And so we were out at dinner, and it's 10 o'clock, 10:30 at the end of dinner. And he said, "Did you bring the bowl?" And I said, the bowl? You mean for the bread, the blessed bread?" He said, "No, the bowl for the communion." I said, "Oh, you mean the chalice? The chalice? No, I don't have the chalice. You don't have a chalice?" Well, it turns out they didn't have a chalice, a spear, a discos, a spoon, napkins, any of that, because Father Michael had one of these nice liturgical kits that included all that. So when I told them everything they needed, they assumed I had the same thing. So I said, here's what you do. Is the Walmart 24 hours? And he said it was. And I said, go get maybe an opaque wine glass, get a long-handled teaspoon, get some nice napkins, get a nice plate. We're going to make this work. So the liturgy the next morning, just before we were ready to start the liturgy and I was waiting to finish the bread prep, he said a fellow was going to be bringing a makeshift chalice from home. I said, well, whatever it is, it's part of the church now. You can't use it anymore. And you ready? He brought a trophy. It was a trophy. and it had lattice work along the rim of it. So there's no way you could drink from it. And so that was I think the wine, I might be wrong, but I think the wine was a cab. It was a Cabernet, and it was God is good. It was one of the most interesting liturgies, but you must always make sure you've got everything in place to do justice to the divine liturgy.
See, I'm curious what place you got.
You're curious what?
With the trophy.
Did you get
It only had initials on it. It didn't really say anything like first place or
so it was basically
anything.
honorable mention. Someone gave you a participation trophy, Father Joseph.
Father Joseph, does the parish still have the trophy?
I served them a half a dozen times before they got a priest, and I think that they've got everything in place now. They've got everything in place now.
Well, I'd love to hear at least one more story if you have it.
Well, I'll tell a story, but it's about how you shouldn't share all the stories. Many times we try to use stories as a way to engage people, to make them feel at ease, to feel comfortable. This is done in sermons, but even when you're visiting people in the hospital, sometimes there's not a lot to talk about. You don't want to talk about the demise, perhaps, that they're worrying about. So you shouldn't share all stories. And here's the background on this story, true story. In North Carolina, where I was serving, there was another Baptist minister whose last name was Huneycutt. And we had a woman in our church who had recently converted to Orthodoxy, and her husband's name was Jerry. His name was Jerry, and he wasn't really in favor of the church at all. And he wasn't Orthodox, and so he never called me father or anything like that. So one night late, my phone rang, and the voice on the other end said, "Is this Pastor Huneycutt?" And I said, it is. And he says, "Well, this is Jerry. She left me." And I said, "Really? What happened?" So the man's telling me how the wife had left him. And after about 5 or 10 minutes, he says, "Wait, is this Reverend Huneycutt, pastor of Second Baptist Church, Willow Creek?" And I said, "No, this is Father Joseph." And he said, "I'm sorry, I got the wrong number." So he hung up. So honest to goodness, I'm visiting people that I don't know in the hospital. I volunteered once a month to be the chaplain. This is like a year later. And I go in this room, and this man is in really bad shape. He's on the bed, and there's all these people standing around him. No one's talking to me. And for some foolish reason, I thought, tell him that funny story about, being confused with the Baptist pastor with the same last name. And so I told them the story, just like I'm telling you all. And about 2/3 of the way through the story, a woman walked out. So I got done. I got to the punchline. You guys were nice enough to snicker. I got to the punchline. Nobody laughed. And the guy on the bed said, "Yeah, that's her. She just walked out."
Oh, I'm in pain right now. I'm in so much pain. Oh, man.
So I've made every mistake. I don't want to talk about all my mistakes, but those are some stories that, we can share.
Oh, man. Well, I've enjoyed for years your storytelling, especially enjoyed the Orthodoxy podcast for that reason. It's always been a blessing. So I'm really thankful you came on today. We do have a couple minutes, so I don't know if you've got one more that you want to share.
There's a comment, Deacon Adam. Kenny left us a comment.
Yeah. Okay. So Father, there's a comment. How many times? I guess this is back to when I talked about inviting people to Pascha. How many times are we going to walk around this church? Well, we are Orthodox, and there are 12 apostles. Thank you, Kitty. But we're coming up on 30 minutes. I don't know if you have one more little short story before we sign off this week.
On a serious note, for people that have fledgling missions and parishes, there's that saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Don't do that in the church business. Too many times I've done this, and I see priests that have done this. They actually think that by putting someone in a position of ministry or on the parish council or the head of an organization that doesn't like the priest or that doesn't really is not a team player, it might be good for them. It's bad. It's bad for everybody. It's bad for the person you gave the responsibility to, and it's probably bad for you. I remember lamenting one time about a situation, and a subdeacon said, Father, sometimes people don't recognize the priest unless he's on the cross. And others are more than happy to make sure they recognize him. So that's true. And I'm just being serious here. We should not put people in positions that to change them or that might not meet their skill set, or if they're tempted to sort of bring down the whole mission. And that does happen from time to time. It's not a funny story. Yeah.
No, I agree completely. This is something that in my Pioneers retreat that I do at churches, we talk a lot about making sure the right person is in the right position and just the disaster that can come when that's not happening.
Right.
So I appreciate you bringing that up.
The other thing is, don't blow up your church school. We decided one year, I had this great idea that I was going to end church school as we know it, and we were going to kind of do a mass gathering on Sunday and divide the kids up into intergenerational groups. And you know what? Run those ideas by your church school teachers before you tell them that this is the new idea. Yeah, I did that. I made that mistake.
So your Sunday school teachers found out at the same time as everyone else?
Well, the clergy and I thought it would be a good idea. That's always it's kind of a bad idea right there. And so we schooled the church school teachers on it, and the kids were fine because they were with each other. The teachers were with the kids without proper direction. Yeah, it's a bad idea. Don't blow up your church school.
Okay. All right.
Father Joseph, actually, one year I had my church school teachers tell me that they were frazzled and burned out and needed some more help and more involvement from other parents. And when nobody volunteered, then we canceled it for a year. But at least I could say I did that with the support of the church school teachers. They knew that it was coming. So you did have me worried a little bit. I was like, did I make another mistake? Like, no, at least I was out in front of it. But
wasn't that our first episode talking about your Christian ed?
Yeah, the very first episode of Stories That Work was talking about my journey, my parish's journey of finding the Christian ed that works on the day that it works and the way that it works, trying many different nights and ideas. But Christian ed is definitely not a one-size-fits-all sort of thing, is it, Father Joseph?
True. What's going to happen for us, since we're not allowed to have church school as we know it, starting, well, this Sunday I'm doing an instructional liturgy for the kids, but next Sunday at St. Joseph, just like we would dismiss the kids after communion, the teachers and kids and moms with young children, we're going to be dismissing them. You know what? This is really bad, and I don't know if any of our bishops are listening. I'm going to get in trouble. They're going to be dismissed to go be with each other and run around outside. Because when I talked to my Christian ed director, she's like, who wants to do Zoom after Divine Liturgy? And the kids are going to be in different places and so forth. I mentioned it to a parent. They said, the kids need to be with each other. I mean, they need that fellowship, that bond that they have normally through church, school, and other activities. We've robbed them from it, or we're being robbed. And so they're going to be running around outside a little early when the adults are finishing up liturgy. So anyway, if y'all don't hear from me anymore, you'll know that I said the wrong thing.
Well, anytime you preface something with "I hope the bishop's not listening," it kind of makes me grimace. But I will back up your point, though. Sister Magdalene over at the Monastery of St. John the Baptist in Essex, England, she wrote a wonderful book called Conversations with Children, and is a renowned Christian ed youth worker type of person. She's the nun at the monastery who runs the kids' clubhouse on Sunday afternoons. And I've met her a couple of times, and she reaffirmed the importance of the children being able to play soccer after liturgy with each other on the church grounds, and run around and play tag and things like that. That they need to know that the church, it's okay to look forward to things other than liturgy at the church as well, and that their whole life of prayer and recreation can revolve around the church life. So I would say Sister Magdalene would agree with you that you're on the right track, Father Joseph.
Thank God. Thank God.
Well, I would also say, I think you've shared with us an example of we've spent the last 6 months saying this story might work. Like the verdict's out. We're trying all sorts of things, and I'm thankful that we've had a lot of people in leadership all over the place saying we got to try things. We gotta take a little, figure things out. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing these stories.
Yeah, thanks for being nice to me. And, that was really sly of you to tell me just to stop my camera. That's wrong. I mean, that is wrong. I mean, I know I'm older now and, probably not as handsome, but that's wrong.
You should turn your camera on before you go. You should see your face one more time.
Father Joseph, the pulsating icon is
you have to come back and see.
It's hypnotizing. I can't take my eyes off of it every time you talk.
The last thing I want to say, for any clergy that are watching, for laity, keep your mouth shut. For any clergy that are watching, if you've enjoyed anything about Father Huneycutt's ministries in the past and his work that he shared, I encourage you to go check out the Becoming a Preacher series. And he was one of our speakers for one of the videos, and I know you probably prepared, but you felt like you just felt so natural. I wasn't sure if you were just speaking off your years of experience, or I couldn't tell, but it was such a helpful moment. And I've used your notes several times in my homilies as I've given notes. And so any of our clergy that are paying attention, if you're ever in a position where you need a refresher on homiletics, the whole series is really good. But, just because you're on, I want to remind people that the tips you gave were great, because it was a reminder that just the spectrum and variety that we see in homiletics. So I really appreciated that.
Thank God. And one last shout out to the new movie series or video series, In the Name of Choice, that you mentioned at the beginning of this episode. I watched it from beginning to end without interruption and was amazed. Very good work, Adam. Thank you.
Oh, Deacon Adam. God, thank you. It was labor of love. Labor of love. So many helpful people were involved. So that's it for this week. We'll be signing off. Father Matthew, thank you as my co-host. Father Joseph, there we go. We get to say goodbye. You got to come back and watch your face. your pulsating image.
Yeah, it's hypnotizing. But
It
Father,
good.
thank you for sharing, and I will second what Deacon Adam said about your Becoming a Preacher episode. I think you gave 10 tips on how to give a homily, prepare a homily, and I've used all of them at different points. It's been very helpful in my preaching. So thank you for that. Thank you for coming on, and we're sorry for the technical difficulties. It was seriously unintended.
Listen, I want to say one last thing, because people might not understand that before they were allowed to see you all y'all talked about was sabotaging my show. All you talked about was sabotaging my show. So don't think you can get away by blaming my secretary and homeschooling. So you think you're making up for it by saying, oh, you did a good thing about the preaching thing. I'm out of here. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. See you next week.